Alright, welcome to my presentation over the integration of visual literacy into my classroom. Today's focus is going to be on how I'm going to implement a stronger focus on visual literacy into my science classes. Currently I'm teaching physical science and physics. I also teach chemistry as well, depending on the year. My name is Thomas Thornton, and this is for the class Education 5618 at Austin Peay State University for Professor Ann Wall. So, first thing I want to go over is how I'm going to incorporate typeface into my classroom. Real quick, I want to make the distinction that typeface is just the general style of lettering, whereas font is how that typeface is changed. So, you may have a typeface of Times New Roman. The font would be Times New Roman plus the size, the weight, is it bold, is it italicized, all of those go into the font. So typeface is a more general version of saying what the font is, and at this point, due to the way that technology has become and the way that we have conceptualized these two terms, it's just accepted that we can use them interchangeably, even though there is that difference. Now, the three ways that I plan on incorporating this into my classroom is through student communication, parent communication, and administrative communication. So when I'm talking about student communication, I'm talking about my presentations, I'm talking about how I handwrite out information, notes, example problems, things of that nature, the whiteboard, if I'm still using that for my clear daily targets. Also, in the hard copies that I provide for students and in the soft copies that I provide for students, so actual paper and digital copies. With each of those, we need to think about, when we are communicating with our students, what media are they looking at this through, because it makes a difference. It really doesn't matter so much about some of the details of the font. If I'm providing a soft copy, so a Google Doc of a worksheet or something along those lines, because there are methods of improving that for that student. So let's say that student is visually impaired and they need a larger font. That is more of an issue on a hard copy, on a class presentation, on handwritten information that I'm presenting, because that student needs to be sitting up close to the classroom, so that they can see. Whereas if I'm providing a soft copy and they get a digital version, they can zoom in on that computer through probably 10 different methods depending on the software. There's lots of different options depending on what they're using in order to improve their ability to read that, so that it's not an issue. Same thing goes with what font or what typeface you use. Some typefaces are better for a digital version than they are for a hard copy. Some typefaces are easier to read versus forcing a student to slow down, maybe by making it a little bit less flowy, which is generally not what we're going for, but sometimes we can burn through information too fast, and that may be a way of trying to slow down that reader a little bit, make them actually think about the information as they speed read through it. There's lots of different ways that student communication can be changed through typeface. Next, we have parent communication. We have two main forms of parent communication when we're teaching, mostly through email and through paperwork. We don't have much control over the typeface of the paperwork or the font of the paperwork. However, we do recognize that the typeface that is used is a very formal typeface, usually, depending on what exactly the paperwork is, but usually it's very formal, and oftentimes it kind of makes the parent or the reader kind of just tune out to it. It's very formalized, very dry. It's not very interesting, so they tend to not pay as much attention to that paperwork. We also deal with them through email, and something that can make your email stand out in their mind is, instead of using the same font that every other person uses for their email, maybe go ahead and change it. I wouldn't go to something less formal necessarily, I would just go to a different typeface so that when they read my email, it stands out from the 50 other emails they might read that hour, and just kind of help improve that retention for whatever that communication was, whether good, bad, just an FYI, whatever that might be. I want that to stand out more, so I could change that typeface. And then for our administrative communication, we generally are dealing with administration through email, official forms, and documentation of incidents. Again, we might want to make our email stand out, particularly if it's an important email. Might want to have that stand out to our administration. I know my principal generally doesn't respond until about the third email, or you hunt them down in the hallway. I may go in, and the next time I need to email him something, change my typeface to see if that gets a better response out of him. Again, with official forms, there's not much we can do about it. Just fill them out, send them back. It's just part of the job. And then documentation of incidents. A lot of times those just get stuck in a file, but so they're not super important unless they become super important and they are getting read by other people, and there's like maybe an investigation into the incident. You wouldn't want to have Comic Sans be the way that you documented a student getting hurt. It just doesn't quite have the right visual literacy component that we need there. We need this is important, this is being documented properly, all the steps, all the right protocol, we were on top of it, we know what's going on, we're trying to handle this as best as possible. You don't want that relaxed feel to that documentation. So make sure, if you created a fun activity for your third grade classroom before and you chose a more silly font, when you create that new document for that documentation of an incident, hopefully not related to your activity, make sure you've chosen a more formal font or typeface in order to be able to have that correct visual literacy component. From there, I want to talk about color for a few minutes. All right. Color doesn't change any of the information being presented, but it does affect how people interpret that information and how they retain that information through visual appeal, contrast, and psychological response. The colors that are chosen for a presentation really make an impact on the success of that presentation as a whole. So most basically is visual appeal. Some people are just going to like one color more than another color. It's kind of a personalized choice, and we can get into the theory of how those choices and how colors work and all that. There's a whole lot of information on that, especially from the fashion industry and everything else. Just make sure you don't choose colors that really don't work well together, and stick to some of your more basic choices. Red goes with green, things of that nature. Orange and blue look good together. Your more basic pairings is what I would stick to, and just kind of know that it may or may not work depending on your audience, and maybe adjust it afterwards if you know it's not working. More importantly, for coloration, probably the most directly applicable is going to be your contrast. So on this Prezi, I put, can you see this 4 times? White, blue, yellow, and black. All right, with the white, blue, and light blue, and various shades of those in the background, and depending on what exactly you're viewing this on, are you looking at a computer? Are you looking at a cell phone? Are you looking at a document or projector system? Depending on which one, those colors might appear differently, and you may or may not be able to read one or all 4 of those. Everyone should be able to see the black on white, blue background, no matter what, but the yellow, the white on white, really just aren't going to work on a lot of screens. So you just need to make sure that contrast is there so that it is visible. Typically on a more solid background, it's not so much of an issue, but if you're trying to put wording on top of a photo, oftentimes it takes several different attempts and really looking at that contrast to be able to see if that is an effective color choice for your font, for your typeface. All right. And then the psychological response. I know personally I have painted my room, my classroom. It is painted a purplish bluish color that I chose to kind of calm down my classroom, to bring down those students and to make sure they don't get too hyped up. All right. Just to try and help relax them a little bit. I've made several choices like that. It hurts me in that some kids fall asleep a little bit more often. I have to fight that battle a little bit more than some classrooms. But I also just have a calmer mood to my classroom, which I feel like helps me be able to focus on the content more than some behavioral issues and things of that nature. So we just need to be able to think about and judge what is the psychological response to this color going to be when you choose it for your presentation through whatever media you're working with at the time. So that's kind of what we need to be thinking about with color. For interactive, interactive is great with visual literacy because we can look at meme creation, infographics being created for complex content. We can make mind maps. We can make presentations through Prezi, PowerPoint, Google Slides, a whole list of other sites. And this is not just for interaction as a whole. It can be broken down into teachers and modeling versus student created. So since we know that students are going to be coming into our classroom with a limited visual literacy, the first place we got to start is through teacher interaction and modeling of what we expect from this visual literacy. So we've got to start at the center and kind of work out what do we mean when we're talking about visual literacy. We got to teach them what we want from our mind maps. We got to show them how to break down, this chapter in a book or this section in a book into an infographic. We got to teach them how to break down that content into that infographic or the mind map or whatever version of visual literacy we're working with. So that teacher component is where this really needs to start in the classroom. And then from there, we can hand this off to the students and have students create those mind maps, those infographics, the other components, presentations. And that's going to really deepen that content understanding. It's going to allow for better studying. So if they create an infographic, as long as the information on that infographic is good, then that's going to be easier to study from for the test than going back and reading a chapter in a book. Also, we can make sure that information is correct on that infographic through peer review and revising after a peer review, which allows for all sorts of deeper comprehension as we're looking at what another peer created and then editing ours based on responses from our other peers. It just allows for that real deep level comprehension and a lot of focus on the actual important portions of that content. And it's going to really help out with information retention. And then from there, all in all, this has changed my way of thinking about my classroom, my pedagogy, by just allowing me to focus on how can I make a more holistic approach to my content, not just providing the information, but how I provide that information and giving me more tools on how I provide that information, as well as pointing out that we used to think about some students are visual learners and some students are active learners. And what it really comes down to is that's not true. All students can be better if that visual component is there. That visual component is going to help everyone understand at a deeper level. While it may not equally help all students, it is going to help all students. And that's why it needs to be incorporated at a much higher level in the classroom than I believe it's being incorporated across America. So it's just really kind of changed how I'm going to approach everything as a whole, just a little bit. It's just providing me more tools in order to differentiate that instruction and to provide more depth to that content and to really break down the content better so that the students retain more and are able to learn at a higher level. Thank you for joining me for my presentation today. Again, my name is Thomas Thornton, and have a wonderful day.